Miss Billy, thank you for sharing that. I've been having, I had 2 or 3 today. One of them I never did really get it straight. Lost family while they're in jail. And there's never a good way to, because they really are. They have no closure for years. It takes years. And it pains me for them. All right, so we're going to use Dr. Bob Utley's notes on Daniel, continue to use his notes, and that's at Bible.org. If you look at Bible.org, series page /Daniel-7, that's what we'll be in for the last part of this, and then 8 and 9 and so on. So I'm so grateful. They have all of these articles that you find on Bible.org. They come out of Dallas Theological Seminary. So they're always just rock solid information. So if you're ever looking for answers and you're searching Google and you're disappointed, because you can always go to Bible.org, and I find them to be very reliable. So we quit last week at verse 12, which carried us through really to the coming of the Son of Man. Okay, so we dealt with the beast and we talked about what all that meant. Then we dealt with the Ancient of Days, God and His place, and calling this whole thing into court, and those that are serving and before Him in the court. And now we're looking at the passage where is often and rightly identified with Jesus as being the Son of Man. But there's some nuances about this passage that we need to look carefully at, because they do have a theological impact when we look closely. So we're going to do that. So we'll read 11 again. It says, I watched, then because of the sound of the arrogant words of the horn was speaking. Remember, this is representative of the Antichrist, and John says that there's many of them. This isn't just talking about an apocalyptic appearance of one person. This very well could be representative of a series of them. And then when we get to 8 tonight, we're going to look at another little horn, and it is most definitely speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes. And yes, which is a type of Antichrist. Yeah. The only problem with using that word is Christ wasn't on the scene yet, but everything that He did was in opposition to God's saints. So we'll look at that in a moment. And as I continued watching, the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to the burning fire. Okay, this is the one from which the little horn comes. As for the rest of the beast, their dominion was removed, but an extension of life was granted to them for a certain period of time. So we talked about that. What does that mean? That means that power-hungry nations that oppress people are still around. God, in his effort to deal with this one particular surge in history, He dealt with them, but He's allowed for a kind of them to continue.
So is this talking about millennial period?
This is talking about a period from any point of time in the past, really, till now, and even to beyond. There will be a day. That's a song too. There will be a day when those corrupt powers will meet their end as well. We obviously know that we're not in those days. That the corrupt powers of the world are still roaming free and quite arrogant. I might add. The thing that stands out about this passage in the 1 and 8 is that this little horn and the other little horn that is mentioned, quite arrogant before God. And we've talked about that a lot, all the way through from when we first started this Old Testament excursion back with Samuel, that it's the arrogance before God, the lack of humility before God, that constantly creates the problem. God can deal with a lot of things. But when human beings become arrogant before God, the options are limited as to how he is going to deal with that arrogance. And so they're really the only choice that we ever have when we become arrogant before God is to surrender. We're either going to be surrendered or be crushed because he has no use of it. In fact, you could almost say he has no patience for it. But he does. He shows himself patient in it. And so that's what happens. We either surrender to him or we're crushed. And so if we want to carry that into the gospel story, Jesus surrendered. Okay. And he was crushed. And Isaiah makes that plain that that's what he came to do. He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our sins. Okay. And so the way that we avoid, the way that we may claim what he has done for us is to surrender to him. We don't escape the surrender because arrogance will still abound. And it doesn't matter where it comes from or how it is being exercised. Arrogance is arrogance, and God has nothing to do with it. Rightfully so, correct? We're the created beings. He's the creator God. And we should recognize the order of things, not for the sake of order and not for the sake of even rule, but for the sake of the glorious nature of God's love, even bothering to create us so that we could share in his life.
There was a time in my life whenever I rebelled against God, and I wasn't a young man either. I was like in my mid-30s, and he just let me go. He just went, go.
Yeah.
And boy, I told him, wow. I mean,
Yeah.
I got to a point where I'm like, where am I at? I
My-
don't even know where I'm at.
My childhood pastor described it like this. He says, you want to do that, he ties a really long piece of rope around your neck. And sooner or later, the jackass at the other end of the rope is going to come to its end. And you will know that you're going to submit.
The funny thing
So
for me,
eventually it happens.
I was so ashamed of myself that I didn't even know how to get back. And that's why I'm so thankful for Celebrate Recovery, because Celebrate Recovery
Gave you a
That
path
helped
back.
me a lot.
let me know everything that you just did is why he died.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that really, because I was just like ashamed and like, he
Yeah.
doesn't have any reason to love me, so there's no reason to go back.
Man, I had that conversation with a guy today.
But that right there, and him all knowing, he knew this is what I needed. He's like, he's 35 years old. He still hasn't learned. He keeps plowing around. I'm just going to let it go, and he's going to figure it out, and he's going to come back. And that's exactly what happened.
And the ones who know what you need are the ones that love you.
Yeah.
The ones that don't love you don't care anyway. So
They
you never
won't
know.
drag-
You never know what they know.
They just want to drag you down. So.
Yeah. All right. So, verse 13. This is where we stopped last week. We're going to pick up. I continued watching in the night visions, and suddenly, it says, one like a son of man. That word like is debatable. One like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. So this is an important thing. Here we get this preposition with. As some translations say on. Some the Aramaic translated as with, and we're in an Aramaic section of this passage, so we want to hold as closely to that as possibly can. The question that Dr. Utley asked is, does this affect the theological aspect of this one like a son of man, a human-like being, human-like being described with divine qualities, riding on the clouds of heaven? So, he says we need to remember some things as we look at this. This is a judgment scene. But he is the one that is unjudged. All right? He is given the eternal kingdom. All people serve him. Parallel phrases are used in conjunction. Let's see if it's actually working tonight. Okay. I guess so. So, it's speaking to him in his proper place that he is the Messiah. So, and what did we say? That he's coming with the clouds. What did the clouds, how were clouds used in the Old Testament? Okay, one is God's physical personal presence. There was a cloud on the mountain, Mount Sinai. He led the people with a cloud, okay? That's one way to look at a cloud. Hey, babe. Another way is to look at clouds as a way to hide God's visible presence. Okay, so he led them by a cloud. He hid in a cloud on the mountain so that if they saw him, they wouldn't die. And then a metaphorical way of expressing God's physical movements, and we see this in passages that are mentioned there already in this passage, Jeremiah and Isaiah.
Because God came to Elijah in a cloud, right? Before, was it Elijah? I don't know.
He rode up on the chariot of fire.
I know, but who was it?
Oh, with Jesus?
Not Jesus. I'll never. I'll find it later.
All right.
Sorry.
In the Messianic use, Jesus...
No, not Enoch. I don't remember. Never mind.
In a Messianic sense, the Messiah comes before God to receive the kingdom with clouds. That's what we're talking about now. He leaves the earth on clouds. Acts 1:9 describes that. And he will return on clouds. So this whole thing of clouds becomes really important. We have to decide what it means here. It has all these different meanings in the Old and New Testament. And the way that...
Maybe it was Moses.
well, I'm trying to think for you what it might have been. Moses went up into a cloud
Okay,
and met God on Mount Sinai.
That's
Yeah. Yeah.
That was
Yeah. So, one like,
Where you at?
I'm on verse 13
What?
of Daniel chapter 7. Okay, so we're just going to go through this one by one, this line one by one. So when it says that he is one like a son of man, the like has caused a lot of people to reject the imagery as this being individual or messianic. And we have to be careful that we don't bring man too close to the deity and holiness of God. But at the same time, as we look to the New Testament, that's exactly what Jesus did. He brings humanity so close to the deity that it's 100% man and 100% God.
Hot in here.
I'm glad it's what you got out of my teaching. That it's hot in here.
I'm about to pass out.
I can fix it. I can fix it. It is kind of hot in here. I don't know why it's not up.
He said build her neatly.
All right. Pretty soon it'll be 69 in here. So it'll be comfortable. Right now it's 71. It is warm.
Huh?
But it was only set to go down to 71. I don't know why that is. I'm going to turn it down in there too.
Sprayer bottles.
It's up everywhere. I guess Nick's trying to save us some money. All right. So he is not one like, but he is one like at the same time. And then he goes on, a son of man was coming. The Aramaic phrase is, son of man is different from the similar Hebrew phrase, which is found in Psalms and Ezekiel. Both phrases are used in parallel with the Psalms 8:4 passage, which is very significant. Because these passages obviously refer to the Messiah. So one like a son of man coming. A son of man was coming. Jesus used, we know this, right? Jesus used the phrase the Son of Man to refer to himself in the New Testament. Jesus always referred to himself as the Son of Man. It was not used of the Messiah and rabbinical Judaism. The Jews of Jesus' day did not see the passages of Daniel necessarily as messianic passages. Okay? They knew, they applied this apocalyptic literature more to history than to prophecy. They knew the history of Antiochus Epiphanes, and so all events was tied closer to that, or developed for something that would move beyond their day into the next day, into the end of the age.
So they were almost looking at it like it was chronological.
To an extent,
Not
yeah.
that it really had any significance. It's
Yeah.
just, this is it. This is it now.
Well, you got to remember their rebellion against the Greeks and establishing themselves as a nation again, re-cleansing the temple and all of that. That was like their Independence Day. Hanukkah celebrates the season of light celebrates the Maccabean revolt where they took back Jerusalem and the countryside, and so you naturally would want to refer to and hang on to those events as being significant. Okay, there were some who thought the Maccabean brothers were the Son of Man that had come to rescue. Okay, because they had done it. But as we move through the life of Jesus and beyond into the first century, it becomes obvious. Jesus used the term. And so, in the real sense, Jesus brings stark clarity to the Son of Man being messianic by he himself claiming the name Son of Man and then actually being the Messiah that's come to save.
Fulfilling the prophecies about this.
Yeah. That's right. So, to confuse it a little bit more, we've often looked at this passage. It says, suddenly one like a son of man was coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. So he approached God. So, oh shoot! What is this? What is the scholar's name? I can't even call his name. I gotta look it up because you may or may not have heard of him. And I'm drawing a blank for some reason. N.T. Wright. Heard of N.T. Wright? N.T. Wright reads this passage as not Jesus coming down on clouds, which is how we read this because of the clouds of heaven, but he actually views this whole passage as Jesus returning. So it is a passage that deals with a conquering king that has already done his work and is returning back to his rightful place. And it makes good sense when we understand the meaning of the clouds. If the clouds were there as a means of either movement of deity from one place to the other, okay, or a way to now hide the one that is no longer, not to hide, that's the word that they use here, but to bring attention to his glory. Okay? In the Old Testament, the clouds would have hidden it. But with Jesus, they're drawing attention to it.
I always took it to just mean that he was coming from the heavens.
Yeah.
I never really read that much.
Yeah. Well, N.T. Wright, who's a historian and a theologian, he's got a podcast, Ask N.T. Wright Anything. And in the podcast, he discusses at great length. He's an English guy. You ever... Oh, man, he's really good.
Okay.
Anyway, I hope I didn't confuse you on that too much. So he comes like one like a son of man, coming with the clouds, not necessarily on the clouds. He approached the Ancient of Days and was escorted before him. He was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, so that those of every people, nation, and language should serve him. Thank you. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will not be destroyed. So every bit of that is the way that we understand God's presentation of a Messiah to his creation and what happens when he does his work. Okay? And that's really what we're focused on. So Daniel is provided a vision that allows for not only his people to look into what God is going to do in the future, but for people contemporary to Jesus to look and say, this is happening now. This has happened in our lifetime. And then for us to be able to say, yes, this is how God has dealt with the problem of sin in the world. And so we believe it. And it's available to generations until such day that this earth pass away and there's a new heaven and a new earth.
When you keep saying messianic, so you're talking about like as of the Messiah? Is that what you mean?
No, messianic deals directly with Jesus. Everything that deals with Jesus is messianic in nature. So the ancient guys wanted to be able to know when the Messiah would appear. They wanted to know what he was going to look like when he appeared. They studied this stuff, and they finally decided that when the Messiah comes back, he's going to be this great military ruler that restores the nation of Israel, and he's going to reign forever. Okay, so that's, after hundreds of years, this is who they're looking for. And then along comes Jesus. And he's nothing that they're looking
The
for.
Lamb.
Yeah. So the suffering servant passages, although part of it was never meant to bring, first of all, an end to his life. Okay, you really got to kind of have sympathy. They find themselves establishing this, what they believe to be the reality of who the Messiah was going to be and what it was going to be like and the results of his coming. And then here comes Jesus, and he never calls himself the Messiah, but the people understand better than the leaders. No, this is what the Messiah looks like. He's come to set the captives free. He's come to, make the lame walk, and all these things that had everything to do directly with their lives. So they understood that the Messiah was more about who I am and what I need and my brokenness and my sinfulness, rather than this nationalistic idea.
So
Okay.
when you say that, you mean almost what they believed at that time, what they created to believe that was there. This is what's coming.
And Jesus makes it pretty clear. He says, he's speaking to the temple leaders and the Pharisees. You claim to be here to guide the people to God, but you're keeping them from God. You've missed the whole point. And so I've come as the good shepherd, which comes right out of Ezekiel. I mean, he just brings it right out of Ezekiel and just claims it for his own. And really here, he does the same thing. This Son of Man that you read about in Daniel, I'm him. I'm him.
It's funny you say that, and it helps to more understand, because I've noticed since I've been watching The Chosen, and he's on his walk and he's picking his followers, his disciples and stuff, and they all have this like doubt. And when they go to get Nathaniel, and Nathaniel's like, "Who are you talking about?" And they're like, "Jesus of Nazareth." And he goes, "What?" And he's like, "Nothing good comes from Nazareth. Nothing good." And I mean, that really kind of works together, I understand.
Yeah.
Because I noticed they were doing it, and I thought it was more just kind of a stature thing, but it was more than that. It was an ingrained belief, spiritual or religious belief.
Yeah.
They had just been
That actually held them captive.
Right.
They were almost inept at breaking free from it, because it was something they believed in so much. And I don't remember the name of the movie, but it was about this little boy that he was artificial intelligence, but he wanted to be a real boy. And he believed it so much. He just believed that he could be a real boy.
Was it AI?
I think it was. He becomes fixated on Pinocchio and this whole thing, and he winds up going back to the one that had actually created him. Okay, it tells the story for us, where what we really want, what is coded into us, so to speak, is that we want to be known and be loved by the one that made us.
Yeah.
And Jesus comes and makes that possible. Doesn't have to. It's not about a national movement or anything like that. It's just making it possible to know the one that made you and loves you.
One-on-one.
Yeah.
Individual.
Yeah. So 15. As for me, Daniel, my spirit was deeply distressed within me, and the visions in my mind terrified me. I approached one of those who was standing by and asked him to clarify all this. So an angel is close by. There's this vision that is open to him, and that's what's going on. So he let me know the interpretation of these things. These huge beasts, 4 in number, are 4 kings who will rise from the earth, which we've already gone over. But the holy ones of the Most High will receive the kingdom and possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. Now, the language is tricky here, because it says, but the holy ones of the Most High, which is exactly the way it should read. So who are the holy ones of the Most High? Another word for holy ones would be the saints of the Most High. So this is God's people. Okay? So he's saying, but God's people will receive the kingdom and possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. This is validated in several places in the New Testament text where we are told that, we're going to rule. So we're going to take possession of. We see rule as ruling over, but that's not the way that it's always meant. And that's for another time. But so there's a reality about this, that when all of this happens, we've got a stake, we've got a claim in everything that God is doing forever and ever. Then I wanted to be clear about the 4th beast, this Antichrist appearing beast. The one different from all the others, extremely terrifying, with iron teeth and bronze claws, devouring, crushing, and trampling with its feet where whatever was left. Also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head. Let's see. So the 4th beast he's speaking of here is considered Rome, or dominion powers of the earth. Okay, Rome is illustrative of kind of the way we still do business.
Yeah, we're still
We pretty much, we all rely on a broken system to live, and it's often corrupt, and it's often oppressive, and it often leaves us wanting, and sometimes it just down and out, it just persecutes you, which I don't want to get off on a tangent, but from a Christian point of view, it's becoming more and more prevalent with the whole sexual identity things that's happening. So we just have to watch and see. And he says, I'm also wanting to know about the 10 horns on its head, 10 being a number for completion. So some people will try to identify a reign or a rule or a leader with each one of these 10 horns. But Dr. Utley is saying this is just representative of complete power that is being exercised here. The 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up, the one that behaves as the Antichrist, before which 3 fell. The horn had 3 eyes and a mouth that spoke arrogantly, and that looked bigger than the others. As I was watching this horn wage war against the holy ones, and was prevailing over them, until the Ancient of Days arrived, and a judgment was given in favor of the holy ones of the Most High. For the time had come, and the holy ones took possession of the kingdom. So, the Antichrist persecutes God's people until the Ancient of Days, until God shows up. He sits down on his judgment seat in the courtroom, and he pronounces judgment on the little horn, which represents the Antichrist, or, as 1 John says, Antichrist, multiple. They're condemned, and the saints take possession of the kingdom. All right. This is what he said. The fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trample it down, and crush it. It means that this power is widespread, it's fearful, and it's complete. It will 10 horns or 10 kings who will rise from its kingdom. Another king, different from the previous ones, will rise after them and subdue 3 kings. This is, familiar to the beast. Had the 3 ribs that we were looking at before, the bear, and had the 3 ribs exposed. So what it's describing here, that this power overtakes all the other world powers. Okay. He will speak words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones of the Most High. He will intend to change religious festivals and laws, and the holy ones will be handed over to him for a time, times, and a half a time. Okay, lots made out of that. What does that mean? It never uses the word years. Some people try to make it into years or months. But what is it saying? I think that it's saying, so this little horn speaks against the Most High and oppresses his people. Okay, what he's going to try to do is change religious practice, which is what Antiochus Epiphanes did. Okay, he took away their morning and evening sacrifice. He set up a statue of Zeus in the temple. He would offer a pig on the altar table to Zeus in the temple. So he, in his attempt to psychologically break the people, he meant to break their religion. Okay, and so that's what he's saying. That's what he did, and that's what this Antichrist figures will do. Their job will be to break the religious practices, the religious beliefs, the religious law, all these various things that followers of Yahweh or God, and even followers of Jesus in our day, would suffer under that activity. But it says then the holy ones will be handed over to him for times, and a half a time. Meaning there's going to be a period where people that trust and believe in God are going to suffer. For times, but it's not going to be a time that drags out forever. In fact, there's an abbreviated time. That's what the half a time means. It's going to be cut short. It's not going to be as long as the Antichrist figures would hope, and it's not going to be as long as we come to believe it may be, to a point of hopelessness. It means that God's going to allow this, but he's not going to allow it for long. Okay? Does that make sense?
It's happened a bunch of times.
Yes. That is why we're not talking about a specific point in time. We're talking about the character and nature of evil in the world that persist through time, and that believers and followers, especially in Jesus, okay, since we're on that side of the cross, that we have to suffer and endure. And it does happen not globally, like we think about the apocalypse.
Right, but it happens.
But it does happen in isolated areas.
People were martyred, and
yeah, it happened.
And the priests would hide.
Yeah.
They had priest holes, and
yeah. I heard a testimony today from a priest that early in the century they were sending people to various what was becoming communist countries, and Catholic priests were being killed.
Yeah.
You know, simply for just being a priest. They didn't have to open their mouth. They were just. So that's happened 1,000 times over since the first century.
Yeah.
And so in each one of those cases, we discover that, oh yeah, this is the living out of everything that's spoken of here. And then we also find cases where when the people are set free, what some would see possessing the kingdom forever now. So you take the church in South Korea that for decades all they did was pray, because that's all that was allowed was to pray. And even after the North and the South separated, there wasn't an immediate church that came forth, but when it did, it was unbelievable. The millions of people.
Wow.
Yeah, and the same thing. I heard a guy the other day talking about this thing in China. Now, he said if by chance that those people were able to gain their freedom, and the underground church in China broke out, the world would never be the same. They estimate 600 million Chinese Christians.
Wow.
I thought that was a lot. I thought that was too many. But let's just say it's just 300 million, half of that. That's the population of the United States. That would be amazing.
Hey, how did the Bible Belt come to be?
Oh, in our section of,
Yeah.
okay, so that's a good question. Why did it not persist in the North like it has in the South?
I mean, I have my own personal,
Yeah.
which is not founded on anything but just my own readings. But I was just curious.
Well, it really wasn't a thing until after the Civil War.
That, honestly, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
And what happened in that was, well, when you look at the geopolitical, socioeconomic state of the South, where did your hope come from? The hope comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I mean, religion became a more important part of life. The other thing that happened is, well, the African American expression of faith began to blossom because they were off the plantation. That's the other thing that happened in white churches. A lot of churches were plantation oriented, where they built a church for their family and the immediate people around. And then those churches began to kind of break apart and spread, and churches grew. They didn't have all of that happen in the North. And then missionary societies and Bible societies that were prevalent in the North, the South didn't have that, but the church wanted to be a part of the missionary movement. So they began to establish missionary societies in the South. And then, I guess, 40, 50 years after the war, Baptists in the South began to come together to be more cooperative in what they were doing, because there were so many smaller churches and that's how the Southern Baptist Convention came into being.
Okay. I always kind of felt that I thought the Civil War was a big division, but then I kind of thought it was almost like a meet in the middle type thing.
Yeah. No, it was definitely the socioeconomic environment after the war that really helped the church in the South blossom. And even before then, Baptist history is pretty interesting, but there was little arguments and fights between different denominations and different churches and stuff.
Never heard of that.
But yeah, imagine
I
that.
don't believe that.
But after the war, everybody was just kind of war weary, and so they learned to cooperate, and that seeded growth. In fact, early on in the 20th century, the Southern Baptist Convention made a huge loan to try to establish a missionary presence in the world, and the Depression hit. And one man really made sure that the churches stayed united, stayed cooperating, so that they could pay that loan back and not become the laughing stock of the world, and they did it. And out of that, what was a near tragedy became a lot of strength too.
And I think about that even when you was talking about for a time and then a half a time and all that, and of course, the easy thing is to say God knows what He's doing, but it also, I believe it's a refining time.
Yeah, our biggest enemy today is us. God's pretty active, but we've just gotten so lazy that it's not even funny. We depend on. It's interesting. I was actually listening to a podcast on my way to work this morning. We depend on these for everything now, all the while being proven that the people that actually provide us with these control the message to the point that we don't know what's getting out. But we depend on them. We say this is the new way to do it, and it's actually not working because all it takes is one person to decide, I don't think people need to know that, and they won't know it.
Remember when you used to know like hundreds of phone numbers? Remember those?
Oh man, I remember. I used to remember everybody's phone.
I know, and now I like somebody that what's that number? I'm like, I don't know.
My own phone number.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a good little side trip there.
Well, I'm glad it came up because I've often wondered that, and there's nowhere to really ask that question. There's
Yeah.
no books written on. See, there's what you need. You need to write a book.
Oh, there's lots of books on it. But I may have to do a study on church history. I think if at least in America, I think everybody would. Or if it was only just Baptist history, it would be enough.
Oh, yeah.
But my seminary, we were joking about that. My seminary church history professor was fantastic, and so I could just give you his notes, and you never have to come to a class. Just read his notes, and you know everything. Really great. Okay, verse 23. This is what he said. The fourth beast will be a fourth kingdom on the earth, different from all the others. The 10 horns are 10 kings. We talked about that. Verse 25. He speaks words against the Most High and oppress the holy ones. 26. But court will convene, and his dominion will be taken away to be completely destroyed forever. So when it says court is convened, God comes on the scene and he says, justice is about to be established forever. Okay, so the Ancient of Days has shown up. He set up court, and he's going to convene court, and he's going to completely destroy this forever. The kingdom, dominion, and greatness of the kingdoms under all of heaven will be given to the people, the holy ones of the Most High. So that's a diasis in Hebrew. It's two words to say one thing, or two phrases to say one thing. So the people are the holy ones, is what I'm saying, of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will serve and obey him. This is the end of the account. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts terrified me greatly, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. So he's been given something that troubled him, but he's going to keep it to himself. And we don't know why, but he does. All right. Now, at the end of chapter 7, the text shifts from Aramaic back to Hebrew. All right. So it's notable because everything that we've been dealing with from about chapter 2, verse 4 to now has been written for the intention of the Gentile people to read it, the Babylonians and the Medo-Persians.
As for the Jews, so for the Gentiles.
But now we're back with the Jews. This is Hebrew that this is written in. Okay, a vision of the ram and a goat. In the 3rd year of King Belshazzar's reign, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one that had appeared to me earlier, the one we just got through looking at. I saw the vision, and as I watched, I was in the fortress city of Susa, in the province of Elam. This later became the capital, but it wasn't at this time. I saw in the vision that I was beside the Ulai Canal. I looked up, and there was a ram standing beside the canal. He had 2 horns. The 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up last. I saw the ram charging to the west, the north, and the south. No animal could stand against him, and there was no rescue from his power. He did whatever he wanted and became great. All right, so here's another picture of a rising kingdom, and he's talking about the Medo-Persian kingdom, the one that is actually existing in the time that he's seeing this vision. All right? They were brought and did whatever he wanted. As I was observing, a male goat appeared, coming from the west across the surface of the entire earth without touching the ground. The goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came toward the two-horned ram I had seen standing beside the canal and rushed him with a savage fury. I saw him approaching the ram, and infuriated with him, he struck the ram, breaking his two horns, and the ram was not strong enough to stand against him. The goat threw him to the ground and trampled him, and there was no one to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat acted even more arrogantly, but when he became powerful, the large horn was broken. 4 conspicuous horns came up in its place, pointing toward the 4 winds of heaven. All right, so here we have the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. Okay, so it was the Babylonian Empire. The Medes and the Persians had already, basically the Persians had conquered the Medes, and then they came and they conquered the Babylonians. So they established this vast empire. The goat here, who might you imagine the goat be? Greece. So the next kingdom up is Greece. And the horn is none other than Alexander the Great, right? So now the Medo-Persians had tried to attack the Greeks, not once, not twice, 4 times, and had failed. So when Alexander the Great, as soon as he had a chance, he put together an army and a navy of about 600,000 men, and he just mowed over, you know. And so he's the horn, all right? But at the age of 32, Alexander the Great gets swamp fever and dies actually in Persia. And what came out of that was 8 rulers that divided up his kingdom amongst themselves, 3 of which became quite powerful. So some people try to assign the horns to 4 of these following rulers. Dr. Utley says that what they are representing was just a complete power. They had power over the whole world. These kings did. So the conqueror was gone, but what he had established in the world was still there and still ruling the world. So that's what that is all about. Let's see, I want to see if he gives, I think he does give a list here. Somewhere. So this is the list of the 8 generals or princes that were, he didn't have children. Antiochus in Asia, Ptolemy in Egypt. Okay, you probably heard of him. They became quite powerful even up to the time of Caesar. And then Seleucus in Syria. So the Seleucids become the ones who are ruling, and what Antiochus Epiphanes comes out of. The Seleucids are ruling at the time that Jesus is coming in. The Herods were loyal to the Seleucids that had set them up in power. Okay, so when Rome took over, they didn't necessarily wipe everything out. They just claimed it as their own, because they had an army that could claim whatever they wanted as their own. Okay. So the 4 conspicuous horns came up to his place, pointing toward the 4 heavens of the earth, meaning that the 4 winds of the earth of the heavens, meaning that they were over everything. All right. From one of them, a little horn emerged and grew extensively toward the south and the east and toward the beautiful land. This is Antiochus Epiphanes. All right. So 3 directions to the south and to the east, because he's coming from the west, okay, and toward the beautiful land, which he's talking about is Judah and Jerusalem. Okay? It grew as high as the heavenly army, made some of the army and some of the stars fall to the earth, and trampled them. So let's look at that a little bit, because those things represent all sorts of things. It says that it grew to the host of heaven. It's translated in poetry as far as the heavens, or even unto the heavens. So up to the heavens. The term host here often applies to God's angelic army, the heavenly hosts that come and announce Jesus' birth. But in this context, it refers to either the people of God, okay, or a metaphor for the little horn's ambition to rival God, okay? So Epiphanes' desire to be like God, all right? In which the stars would refer to the angels or heaven, okay? It's problematic that the span of 4 years for this term is used in several senses. It's problematic that in the span of 4 verses, the term is used in several different ways. So here the host of heaven. Later in verse 11, the commander of the hosts, which is the angels. The host himself, the believers, or the host, believers or temple worshipers and temple servants. So the word host is used a lot of different ways. So it kind of becomes complicated to try to understand exactly what it's talking about. You still hot? Okay, just make sure. Got to take care of Patsy. Okay, so the stars, he's saying, it's representative of this Antiochus Epiphanes, a kind of Antichrist, wreaking havoc on the things of God, the people of God, the realm of God. That's what he's desiring to do. He's doing it in an arrogant fashion. So all the symbols, we can find all kind of symbolic uses of stars and the host and all those things. But what we are understanding is that this is his purpose. He wants to disrupt their life, okay, so that he can control what happens to them, how they think, what they're going to do. This was the way that you conquered a people. Only he was particularly cruel about it. And so that's why he's so memorable, especially since he defiled the temple. Okay? And that becomes a big deal. Okay. So, I lost my place. Oh, right here. It acted arrogantly even against the prince of the heavenly armies. It revoked his regular sacrifice and overthrew the place in his sanctuary. This would be the people. Okay? In the rebellion, the army was given up together with the regular sacrifice. All right? The horn threw truth to the ground and was successful in what it did. The truth, what is the truth identified with? Life, God, the Word of God, the direction of God, the will of God. So he's basically trampled that. And also, the people kind of went along with it. When he shows up, the priest especially, in order to keep peace, they just let these things happen. And not good. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the speaker, "How long will the events of this vision last? The regular sacrifice, the rebellion that makes desolate, the giving over of the sanctuary, and the army to be trampled." And he said to me, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored." So he's talking about how long will this desolation exist in the temple? 2,300 days. Same number that Ezekiel uses in his writing. So it's a number that means something. Does it mean a literal 2,300 days? Again, what it means is that there's going to be an end to this. It's not going to go on forever. God's not going to let this be the end. He determines the end. He's in control of how this happens. And that's what they needed to be reminded of.
Pretty close to 7 years.
Yeah. Pretty close to 7 years.
If it was an actual 300.
Let's see. So what my point is, we can get hung up on trying to make sense of the numbers, and we do need to give them attention. But we don't have to look too hard to be able to see what's being conveyed, and that is that this doesn't go on forever. He names these things that were regular activity in the temple, and Antiochus basically did away with them and replaced them with Zeus Olympius worship. This is what he did. So here he is, the two ways it can be interpreted: 2,300 full days, or a number equivalent to 3.5 years that seems to follow the uses in Genesis 1, morning and evening. Evenings and mornings. The context favors number 2, so that it would seem that it's saying a number equivalent to 3.5 years, which is what you just mentioned. And like I said, different commentators choose different ways to looking at it. And the only time that really matters is when you try to tie those interpretations to historical events. And then you may find yourself in a quagmire trying to figure out how everything comes to work. And then it says that it'll be properly restored. So, while I, Daniel, was watching the vision and trying to understand it, there stood before me someone who appeared like to be a man. I heard a human voice calling from the middle of the canal. Gabriel explained the vision to this man. So he's hinting at the idea that this is the Son of Man. And he wants Daniel to know what this vision is all about. And he's telling Gabriel to tell him what it's all about. So he approached where I was standing. When he came near, I was terrified and fell face down. Son of man, he said to me. So Daniel's here. He is being referred to as a son of man, a representative of man. Understand that the vision refers to the time of the end. While he was speaking to me, I fell into a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Then he touched me and made me stand up and said, I'm here to tell you what will happen at the conclusion of the time of wrath, because it refers to the appointed time of the end. The two-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of... Same person. The kings of Media and Persia. We've already talked about that. The shaggy goat represents the king of Greece. And the large horn between his eyes represents the first king, and the 4 horns that took the place of the broken horn represents 4 kingdoms. They will rise from the nation, but without its power. Near the end of their kingdoms, when the rebels have reached the full measure of their sin, a ruthless king, skilled in intrigue, will come to the throne. His power will be great, but it will not be his own. He will cause outrageous destruction and succeed in whatever he does. He will destroy the powerful along with the holy people. He will cause deceit to prosper through his cunning and by his influence. And in his own mind he will exalt himself. He will destroy many in a time of peace. He will even stand against the prince of princesses. He will be broken, not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that have been told is true. Now you are to seal up the vision because it refers to many days in the future. Okay. So, the interpretation of Antiochus Epiphanes, okay, is a representation of what? The end time. Yeah. So Daniel is given a glimpse Not only to the hope that God is revealing for his time, but the hope that God is revealing for all time. And then the angel says, do what? Seal it up. Meaning what? Don't add to, don't take away. This is it. There's nothing else to know about it. All right. Daniel was overcome and lay sick for days. Then I got up and went about the king's business. I was greatly disturbed by the vision and could not understand it. So even after it was explained, he did not understand it. Okay? So revelation from God always leaves us wanting more, not because it's lacking, but because it is a difficult thing to know the mind of God. But he allows us to when we are faithful, when we are seeking, when we are in the business of life with him. He does want us to know. Same thing that he says in 1 Thessalonians 5. He talks about how the thief comes in the middle of the night. But just because he comes in the middle of the night, since you believe, doesn't mean you're surprised by it. You've already been told he's going to come in the middle of the night. So when it happens, you won't be surprised. Everybody else is going to be surprised. But you're not going to be surprised. You're going to be ready. You're going to be ready as one that lives in the light. You're not going to be the one that's living in the dark and gets drunk in the dark and sleeps in the dark and all those things. You're alert. Your life is in tune to what God is preparing to do, so that when it comes, although sudden and although unpredictable, not surprising.
Confirmation.
Yeah, and that's important. That's an important idea about life, because we live in a world that has, if they're even thinking about it, they don't have a clue. They're not thinking about these things, and it's going to come on them with great terror. But we're here, and part of the job that we have is to help them know the truth, so that it won't happen. There won't be an end where the last thing they know is the darkness of their own life. So, Daniel's prayer. This is a great prayer. You're going to read it and you're going to think, this is what we ought to be praying every day today. So, in the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, I think that's how you say that, a Mede by birth, who was made king over the Chaldean kingdom, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood from the books according to the word of the Lord, to the prophet Jeremiah, that the number of years of the desolation of Jerusalem would be 70. So you remember, they're all contemporaries, and Jeremiah has been writing longer. He's been in this game a little bit longer than Daniel, and he's the one that is given the number of 70 years. So he says, hey, look, you're going to be here. Go build houses. Go marry. Go plant crops. Make a life. God doesn't mean for you to suffer here needlessly. So I turned my attention to the Lord God to seek him by prayer and petitions with fasting, sackcloth, and ashes. I prayed to the Lord my God and confessed, oh Lord, the great and awesome God who keeps his gracious covenant with those who love him and keep his commands. Now he's confessing for his whole people. We have sinned, done wrong, acted wickedly, rebelled, and turned away from your commands and ordinances. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, leaders, fathers, and all the people of the land. Bam! Just nails it. This is our problem. We're our problem. Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but this day public shame belongs to us. Ouch. The men of Judah, the residents of Jerusalem and all Israel, those who are near and those who are far, in all the countries where you have banished them because of the disloyalty they have shown to you. He's talking about those in exile. Lord, public shame belongs to us, our kings, our leaders, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you. Compassion and forgiveness belong to the Lord our God. Though we have rebelled against him and have not obeyed the Lord our God by following his instructions that he set before us through his servants, the prophets. All Israel has broken your law and turned away, refusing to obey. The promised curse written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, has been poured out on us because we have sinned against him. He has carried out his words, and he has spoke against us and against our rulers by bringing on us a disaster that is so great that nothing like what has been done to Jerusalem has ever been done under all of heaven. Just as it was written in the law of Moses, all this disaster has come upon us, yet we have not sought the favor of the Lord our God by turning from our iniquities and paying attention to your truth. So the Lord kept the disaster in mind and brought it on us, for the Lord our God is righteous in all he has done, but we have not obeyed him. It goes on like that's not enough. Now, Lord our God, who brought your people out of the land of Egypt with a strong hand and made your name renowned as it is this day, we have sinned, we have acted wickedly. Lord, in keeping with all your righteous acts, may your anger and wrath turn away from your city, Jerusalem, your holy mountain. For because of our sins and the iniquity of our fathers, Jerusalem and your people have become an object of ridicule to all those around us. Therefore, our God, hear the prayer and the petitions of your servant. Make your face shine on your desolate sanctuary for the Lord's sake. Listen closely, my God, and hear. Open your eyes and see our desolations and the city that bears your name. For we are not presenting our petitions before you based on our righteous acts, but based on your abundant compassion. Lord, hear. Lord, forgive. Lord, listen and act. May God, for your own sake, my God, for your own sake, do not delay, because your city and your people bear your name. So that's pretty powerful prayer. You could pray that prayer for America today, or almost any Western country for sure, and be right on target. You know, I mean, I was picking up kids tonight, so I go through 3 different neighborhoods to pick up kids, and I've started to notice. I notice these things now. Christmas decorations. What would you expect to see in someone's yard at this time of the year for Christmas decorations?
Manger scene.
You would expect to see at least 1 or 2 driving through the neighborhood.
Right.
That you would find something that relates to Christ's birth. Tonight I went to 1, 2, 3 neighborhoods. Not even one.
Wow.
It's all Santa Claus and reindeer and Frosty the Snowman.
Yeah, and dogs with bows on there. I mean, it's really amazing that you don't see anything. You know, and people don't decorate like they used to for Christmas anyway, but I didn't see one. So it's kind of a snapshot picture, you know, of what really is on people's minds at this time of the year. So it tells you that God's not on the radar screen. Jesus may not even be on the radar screen, even at this time of the year that we claim to celebrate his birth. So it has to kind of make you wonder. You know, sin is sin. God's going to deal with it. He's got to deal with it. And so we know that he's dealt with sin once and forever on the cross. The eternal nature of our sinfulness. Okay? That's dealt with. If you trust in Jesus, you don't have to worry about the eternal nature of our sinfulness. But we do have to worry about it. The effects of it as we live in it every day. And not just our own sin, right? But the sins of others. So we're not off the hook. We are held accountable. We are our brother's keeper, even when they're not our Christian brother. Because their sinfulness is having a direct effect upon us, but that's not the reason why we want to deal with their sin. We want to deal with it because it brings no glory to God at all. And what we should want in life is to glorify God in everything that we do, privately, in the depths of our soul, but also the way that we publicly announce and proclaim Him. So that's what it's meant to do. So we live in a country that it's not on the radar. It's just not there. So I was thinking, all this LGBTQ plus stuff, that exists. And it's all in the news, and it's all very important to a lot of powerful people. And I was looking up some numbers, and 7% of America claims to have that sexual orientation. Of those that are trans, it's only 1,000th of 1% that are trans people.
Right.
Okay, a little over 500,000. What was the other number? Oh, marriages. I'm making a big deal about marriages. The marriages are about the same percent. There's not a lot of people that are same sex that are getting married. Most of them still only live together, like most of the population. They choose to live together rather than to be married. So they're just following suit with hetero couples. Okay.
I've seen a big explosion of homosexual marriages and getting divorces now. There's like a huge explosion.
Well, they're like everybody else.
Yeah.
Because the problem's not wanting to be married. The problem is having a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
And you're behind the 8 ball already.
Yeah.
I
So
work with a number of them that I've already seen a number of divorces just in the small pool that I know.
well, imagine this. Imagine if the numbers were turned, and it was 93% of people that lived in a just a God-defined way. Like God's really not. In fact, the sooner they can get rid of God, the better. But then there's 7% of the population that adhere devoutly to a faith in God. Would the same effort be made to provide for the rights of that 7% as is being made to provide for the rights of the 7% that are now? And I would venture to say no, and this is the reason why I say it. Because in all of this that we're speaking of, we find only, when it all shakes out, and it's even described that way, once God has shaken everything, what's going to remain? What cannot be shaken? And what we know that to be is the truth. The truth will never be shaken. Okay? But people don't want to live by the truth. They want to live by a truth.
Their truth.
Yeah, or somebody else's. I think
believe.
we've even reached a point now where people don't even contemplate their own lives enough to establish a meaningful direction for their own life. They're borrowing and piggybacking others because it sounds good or it gets them this or whatever it may be.
And I don't even believe they're actually like instilling it in their lives. They're just using it as barking points in conversation.
And it may be. And that's what I'm talking about. It's not their own truth. It's a truth that they have decided is going to work for them. Okay, so when you have people like that, it's hard. It's almost impossible for them to acknowledge that there is a truth, that there is the truth for life. We live on that truth. God is truth. The scripture, every time the word is used, it's referring back to the character and nature of God and how He relates and interacts with us in His history. So this moving away from the likes of Antiochus Epiphanes becomes harder and harder to do. They become more prevalent in our lives. And yet, Jesus tells us the only way we really deal with these folks is to love them. And Paul said the way that we do that is to bless them, to never curse them, to always bless your enemies, do not curse. And he says it's like heaping hot coals on their head. Okay, so what his point is, they're not going to like the way that we respond to them with love and care. So what I say all of that to say this. In the midst of all of that, we still only have, we don't have to defend the church, because sometimes it's indefensible here lately, in some cases. We don't have to defend the church. We don't have to tear it down to make a point like some want to do. All we're left with doing is loving and blessing and never cursing and never hating. And Jesus says that's how people will know you're one of mine, is the way that you love one another. Now, isn't that interesting? When it all comes down to knowing the truth of God, the way that it's known is the way that we love, but we have to really know how to do that. We're not able to love people and say, I'm just going to let you do what you want to do or be who you want to be because I love you. That's really not love. If what they're choosing is destructive, the loving thing to do is to keep them from out of destruction. Because a child wants to touch a hot stove doesn't mean you let them touch a hot stove. Anyway. I don't know what that was all about, but
I enjoyed it.
it's been on my mind here lately.
I enjoyed it. I was waiting for you to start talking about people's personal pronouns.